achieving personal salvation and gratification, and realizing that these possibilities are, after all, limited, and consequently suffering disillusionment, as did Weber. Flax sought to reconcile convictions with responsibility. This meant acting politically, because our values cannot be realized in any durable sense without a reconstruction of the political and social system. Politics, however, apart from an existential ethic, would be increasingly manipulative, power-oriented, sacrificial of human lives and souls, in short, corrupted. The answer, suggested Flax, was strategic analysis, though he acknowledged the prevailing suspicion of an explicit systematic preoccupation strategy as imposing artificial constraints, restricting spontaneity, and reducing responsiveness to what people really wanted, as if it was the property of a few. Acting in terms of strategy is elitist. Unfortunately, without strategy, there would be no sense of priorities, inarticulateness, and an almost random behavior among students who want to do effective social action. This describes the problem rather than identify solutions, as with previous generations of radicals. The only way out of the dilemma appeared to be to get among the people working with them to address their issues without claiming that they had all the answers. So it was that Hayden joined a community program, the Economic Research and Action Project in New York. The prohibition on elitism was limiting. There were other liberal forces in the area with whom it might be advisable to coalesce, but Hayden found them extremely self-serving, with wide community contact but no active and radical membership base, in programs that would do very little to change the real lives of the poor. Entering into political bartering would violate the basic trust we have with the neighborhood people. Our place is at the bottom. Liberal strategies assume that the masses are apathetic and can only be roused because of simple material needs or during short periods of great enthusiasm. Because of this, they need skilled and responsible leaders. The complaint then followed a familiar path. Leaders presumed that only they could maintain the organization because people reacted with disinterest or suspicion to such elitism. The leadership was able to call the masses apathetic, although he acknowledged a warring tendency to think subserviently. Hayden was considered not the broad masses of Marxist methodology, but a minority underclass. He reconciled from the obvious answer, which was to form coalitions or at least make temporary arrangements with the powerful. This was rejected because no more than welfare state reforms would be on offer, bound to fail because they were not conceived by the poor people they are designed for, and allowed the middle class to relax into the comfortable sense that everything is managed well. His focus was solely about power and avoiding appearing to want it. That the assumption had to be that if those at the bottom had power, they would do well by themselves and others, but they want the things that the activists believe they ought to want. If their minds had been turned by years of powerlessness and consumerist culture, might their demands and the efforts they were prepared to put behind be disappointing. Unsurprisingly, he was left with a mystery when looking for a workable strategy. His aim was a thoroughly democratic revolution, reversing the abdication of power to top-down organizational unions, out of which a new kind of man might emerge who could not be manipulated, because it was precisely against manipulation that he has defined his rebellion. The poor would transform decision-making by acting on their aspirations, working against the grain of an affluent and cohesive society. As he later accepted, the flaw in this analysis was assuming that the aspirations of the poor would be any different from the middle-class society whose values he personally derided. He already was aware of the difficulty of finding leaders who could forswear an interest in the organization for its own sake, or a rank and file who understood and committed themselves to the movement's goals. While Hayden was struggling to sustain his commitment to participatory democracy, SNCC was in the process of banning it. James Foreman, as executive secretary, had argued in 1964 for a proper mass organization rather than coordinated activists to compete with other civil rights organizations. To the centralized, this simply required individuals to subordinate their own issues to the needs of the collective. This was hard for the activists to take. They were afraid that They were afraid that a distant center would be insensitive to local concerns and indulge in empire building. Moreover, it went against SNCC's founding ethos. Participatory democracy in practice, however, had been found frustrating and exhausting. There were the familiar problems of finding local people able to commit time and energy to the cause, and the tendency for the principle to paralyze decision making with constant discussions, which nobody dared bring to a conclusion, as every attempt to take an initiative was challenged as usurpation of democratic rights. In her book Freedom is an Endless Meeting, Francesca Paoletta recounts how demands to let the people decide came up against that exasperating tendency of the people to be moderate, risk adverse, seeking social services rather than revolution. This led to the conviction that people needed to have their real interests explained to them. They were also deep affected to their work. There was an issue with educated Northerners